Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Our Voices podcast, the podcast for straight partners and partners of trans people by our path. I'm your host, Kristen Kelbley. Our guest today is Ben Schilaty. Ben is a social work professor at Utah Valley University. He also works part-time as a therapist specializing in working with LGBTQ clients and their families. Ben is the author of A Walk in My Shoes, Questions I Am Often Asked as a Gay Latter-day Saint, and co-hosts the podcast All Out in the Open with his friend Charlie Bird. He is a co-founder of the Gather Conference, which offers Christ-centered support to LGBT Latter-day Saints and those who love them. Welcome to the podcast, Ben. It's a pleasure to have you.
I am honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Well, so let me give our listeners a little bit of context about why you're on the show. So
Great.
I was doing a little bit of research about the stages of coming out, and I want you to fill in a little bit of background about this, but there's different stages that LGBT spouses go through, whether they're a spouse or not, a spouse to a heterosexual person or not, which can include denial, which can include identity confusion. And what I felt was that given what straight spouses experience when their spouses are sort of on the way out of the closet or discovered to be in a closet, that this would give context to certain behaviors that we see from our spouses. And that can help, I believe, just provide a little bit more, shed a little bit of light on what's actually happening, because for straight spouses, it can be really a confusing time, just as can be a confusing time for the LGBT spouse. It's really confusing for the straight spouse because they're like, what's going on in our relationship?
Mm-hmm.
And answers may or may not be particularly forthcoming depending on what stage of coming out their spouse is. So with that said, I was doing a little research. I found you and talking about the stages of coming out. So can you give us a little background on who came up with the stages of coming out and what they are, and then we'll kind of delve into them.
Yeah, of course. So the stages of coming out, as they're often called, I think were originally called the stages of homosexual identity development. And it was developed by a researcher in Australia named Vivienne Cass. And her first paper was published way back in the 70s. So it's an older model, but she followed the life trajectories of hundreds of, I think, mostly cisgender gay white men in Australia. And so for me, as a gay white man, not in Australia, but in the US, it fit my life like almost to a T. And so, it's important to understand that, with any stages model, no one's ever at like one distinct stage. Like you're in stage one, then you go to stage two. But there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of mixture, and of course, tons of individual variation with anyone who is understanding their identity as an LGBTQ person.
Right. So it's not, it's not linear. So I think our audience will recognize that, like from something like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, you move from one, you move back, you do the two-step with all of these different stages. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And I like in my therapy practice, I mostly see LGBTQ folks, and I'll see them go through this trajectory, then suddenly they'll jump back a few stages, and that's just really common. And so, so it's a model that's been around for a number of decades that I still see playing out in my life and the lives of my clients. And I know thousands of LGBTQ people, and I see this happen in many lives as well. Although there is a lot of individual variation.
Okay, great. So, well, let's just dive into all the stages. I think there are 6 or 7. And as we talk about one, we'll kind of talk about the corresponding experience of the straight spouse, like what they might be seeing as their spouse is going through a particular stage.
Okay, perfect. And I should say that while LGBTQ folks go through these stages, spouses, families go through similar stages as well.
Great.
And when a spouse comes out, they are usually a few stages down the road. And so spouses won't always be at the same place of understanding because someone's being brought into an experience that their partner has been in for years or decades.
Yeah.
So the first stage is called identity confusion. And this is when feelings of same-sex attraction are unacceptable. Like they don't want to be gay. This isn't okay. And they will honestly identify as heterosexual. So if someone's like, are you gay? Do you experience same-sex attraction? They'll say, no. And that's not a lie because it is not okay to be that way. And they'll be looking for reassurances that they aren't gay or LGBTQ. Like, oh, well, that like for me as a gay man, like, oh, well, I thought that actress was pretty, so maybe I am straight. And this is when they'll be seeking information online. They'll be open to learn. They'll be open to learning, and this is when they'll be pursuing heterosexual relationships.
Got it.
So some considerations for family is that you are unlikely to be part of this person's journey. Like in this stage of identity confusion, which is when the person is experiencing a lot of denial, they are most likely not going to know this is happening. This is a very internal process.
Right.
And so it's important to just ask yourself, what messages are you sending? Are you talking about LGBTQ people in a way to signal that you are a safe person for them to come out to? So one of the things I encourage people to do is to let family and friends catch them being kind to LGBTQ people.
Mm.
Say nice things, say affirming things, and then someone is more likely to share what's going on in their life at an earlier stage.
Okay, thank you. Because when you're talking about the stage of it's not okay to be gay, and I'm looking for confirmation that I might be heterosexual, and identifying as heterosexual, and trying to live a heterosexual life, this sounds like it might be the exact stage where you might enter into a heterosexual marriage. That
Hmm.
you might go, okay, I don't want that lifestyle. I mean, just from as a personal note, I remember my ex husband and I having a conversation while we were dating, and I did ask him at like 19 years old, like, "Are you gay?" Like, it was preceded by a whole conversation, and he goes, "No, I figured out that's not what I want." And so, at the time I was 19, like my boyfriend tells me he's not gay, it's fine. But years later, that conversation came back. I figured out that's not what I want. And I think that he might have been in that stage. And I think our listeners can relate or might see some of their own story reflected in that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And this stage, I would define very simply as the person thinking, this isn't real, this isn't happening.
Okay.
Like I'm a heterosexual person.
What about, and let me ask you this, because we do see a difference between our gay husbands and our lesbian wives. So oftentimes, our gay husbands have experienced some kind of same sex attraction from puberty onwards. It might be 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old. Now, they may not have a context or knowing what that necessarily means for them, but that's been there for a while. Whereas our lesbian wives it might be years down the road into marriage or something like that, where they meet someone or they interpreted their. I remember we interviewed Shelley Johnson, she's also a
Uh-huh.
Latter-day Saint, and she described, like, I just thought my over friendliness with my girlfriends in middle school and high school was just girls are allowed to be more affectionate with each other than boys are. So that's what this is. And then later on, she realized, like, oh no, she was even more affectionate with her girlfriend, like female friends as a child. So yeah.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, and that is very true. That bears out in the research that lesbian women tend to come out later than gay
Mhm.
men.
Yeah.
So, and I think there are cultural factors for that, but it's quite common.
Okay. So that was stage one, identity confusion. What is stage two?
Okay, stage two is called identity comparison.
Mm.
And the stage names probably aren't as important as
Yeah.
just like understanding the different experiences that people have. So, this is when someone won't typically identify as gay, but a word like homosexual or same sex attracted is safer. And that's because a word like gay or bisexual, or trans, those are identity labels. At this stage, someone doesn't want to use an identity label. So, they want to more describe an experience. And so, saying I experience same sex attraction or I have same sex attraction just feels safer. Now, that's not to say that someone who identifies as gay is like more evolved than someone who identifies as same-sex attracted, but typically someone will talk about an experience before using an identity label. And this is when people start to compartmentalize, identity and behavior. So someone will say, like, I'm not gay, but they'll engage in no strings same-sex behavior. So it's quite common for people on the stage to feel lonely and isolated, and they'll just want to talk to someone else who's going through a similar thing. And so they'll get on the internet, or they get on a dating website, and they'll be like, hey, I just want to chat with someone. And then they'll meet up with someone that they don't know, and then they'll be experiencing like love and affection and attraction to someone, and then they'll end up having a sexual experience.
Mhm.
And this is quite common, especially in more conservative areas
Mhm.
where it's not as acceptable to be gay or LGBTQ. And then they'll be like, you know what, I just had that experience, but I'm not gay. And
Right.
then they'll do it again the next weekend, and the next weekend, and the next weekend. Like, I'm not gay. This isn't happening. This is just an experience. This is just something that's happening. Like, I don't know why, but this is happening. And this is when they'll be feeling shame and guilt while seeking a cure. So the first stage, was this denial stage, and this stage I would describe as, okay, this is real. This is happening. I do have these feelings, but I can fix it.
Mm.
And so this is when someone will really start to, pray to change their orientation. They'll seek, online, quote unquote cures, or start attending therapy to change their orientation. And so this is when a spouse will often start to know what their gay spouse is going through and avoiding, and has been avoiding. And so this can be a very jarring experience. Well, I'm sure you've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast, about, how jarring it is. But this is a time where you don't want to force or assume an identity. So if you find out that your spouse has been looking at gay pornography, for example, or has engaged in an extramarital affair, then and they're like, well, I'm not gay, and the spouse might want to say, well, clearly you're gay, like obviously you're gay. That's not the time for this identity conversation. Let them be at their own pace. So, and this is when you want to avoid either or approaches, like either you come out or you don't come out, either you're gay or you're straight, either we stay married or we get divorced. Things are like, this is still a pretty early stage in someone's identity development. And so it's important to let them be where they are. And for the spouse, this is a difficult place to be in, because you want answers, you want certainty, you want to know what the future is going to look like. And at this stage, the gay spouse just doesn't know, in a lot of often.
I can speak for myself and a lot of other straight spouses in this position that we did have that conversation. The evidence was there, or the Grinder account was there, or the gay pornography was formed, and the immediate question is, what is this? And it makes sense in context to me now that he was not able to answer that question at that time, or didn't want to. Acknowledge, or wasn't ready, just wasn't ready. I think it's really interesting that you say that this is a time when there's rejecting labels, because something might happen where a husband might say, yeah, I fooled around in college once, it didn't mean anything, or something like that. Like,
Mhm.
whatever, it was a frat party, something happened, but doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, okay, that's great. And then also, I think it's an important point that you said that this is also the time where they're experiencing shame and guilt while seeking a cure. I remember I'm familiar with someone who, also in the Latter Day community, whose husband actually became quite a prominent conversion therapy teacher. And he was gay, and then came out after 35 years of marriage, and
Mhm.
basically said, "Oh, okay, I got this wrong." And
Yep.
so that makes sense, that would be the moment where that sort of thing is happening. Okay,
Yep.
so from there we move to from identity comparison, we move to
Stage 3, which is called identity tolerance. So
okay.
this is when someone will start to try on a homosexual identity. They might say, maybe I'm bi, maybe I'm gay, maybe I'm pansexual, like maybe I'm gay, and a lot of gay men will say things like, but I'm Christian sexual, like I'm attracted to my wife. I'm attracted to gay men and my wife. That's a very common thing for people to say. And this is when they'll start to peek into the LGBTQ world to end social isolation and loneliness. So this is when someone might start to go to like a gay men's support group, or they might go to some other kind of organization organization that feels safe in their community. And this is when culture shock could lead to identity confusion again. So let's say someone goes to a group of like where gay men are meeting together and they see all these people that aren't like them or that have different experiences. And they might say, oh, well, if this is what a gay person is like, maybe I'm not like that. Or they might talk to other people in mixed orientation marriages who are really thriving, and they're like, oh, but my marriage isn't thriving, like what's going on with me? Or maybe they'll see all these marriages that aren't thriving and that are really struggling, like, oh, this makes sense, their marriage ended, my marriage is going to end too.
Mm,
And so stepping into this world can be really jarring for people as they try and figure out, how do I fit in? And this is when more like close friends and loved ones, family, parents will start to be brought into the circle of trust here, as they're trying on this new homosexual identity. So I would describe the stage as, this is real. Like, I am feeling these things. Like, this is happening, but life is going to be normal. Like, I can
mm,
still have, quote unquote, normal life. I can still have the life I thought I was going to have. Like, I can still stay married to my partner. Like, our family is going to stay intact. I have these feelings, I have these experiences, but it's going to be okay. And so it's important to help loved ones see that there's, not a one size fits all LGBTQ experience. Like, some gay men love musicals, and some gay men love sports, and some gay men love both things, or none of those things. Like, there's all kinds of gay people, and that's okay. And also to help them understand, like a lot of mixed orientation marriages end in divorce, and a lot don't. And
mhm.
there's not like a prescribed path for a gay person. Like, you can live the life that aligns with who you are and your values.
Right. I think as you're talking, I'm looking at the corollary experience for straight spouses. And one of the things you talk about is this moment where they might identify as bisexual. And I
Mhm.
think where that can get tricky for the straight spouse is that then they go, oh, well, we have hope. Like, oh, he is sexually attractive, especially if there was a sexually fraught relationship where sex was maybe difficult or wasn't good, or intimacy was rejected or something like that. Then the straight spouse might go, oh, well, if he's bisexual, he really is attracted to me, or she really is attracted to me, she can be attracted to me, and there's that potential. And then so later on, when, as we will get to, when there's a full acceptance of my homosexual identity and sexual orientation, then it's like, oh no, he's not attracted to me, she's not attracted to me, and she never was. And so
Mhm.
later on, that can feel a bit like a bait and switch.
Yes.
It can be interpreted that way, and it can feel like that.
Exactly. And I understand totally, like, where that feeling of like betrayal would come from. And yet for the gay person, they're just trying to figure things out. Like, they're in a tough spot of like, I never wanted to be this. I tried not to be this, and yet I am this, and I've made these life decisions. They're just trying to make life work. And
Mhm.
so, if someone who later identifies as, strictly as a gay man, who at one point identified as bisexual, I wouldn't see that as them like lying or being dishonest. They're just
Mhm.
being hopeful.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. That's an interesting spin on it for our listeners too, to think about that. That's their spouse's version of trying to maybe save the family, save the marriage, that sort of thing. So after identity tolerance, what do we have next?
Yeah. So the next stage is called identity acceptance. And just a quick aside,
Mhm.
I've never been married to a woman, but I have dated a lot of women,
Mm,
and I would come out to them while we were dating,
mm,
and I would often tell them like, yes, I am attracted to you. I think you're beautiful and wonderful, and that wasn't untrue.
mm,
But like, I did think they were beautiful and wonderful. But at the same time, like, I wasn't really attracted to them. I was just like trying so hard to be. I was like, okay, if I just keep trying, this is going to work.
gotcha.
And so if a spouse comes out early in a marriage, they're still believing like, okay, we just need more time. We need more time. Like,
Mm,
as we get more closer, I just need more time. But then if this happens later on in the marriage, and like, well, we already did all the trying.
right. Okay.
All right. So
Great.
stage four is called, yeah. So
Mhm.
stage four is called identity acceptance, and this is the beginning of what's called, often, the gay adolescence or the queer adolescence. So for straight people, when you were a teen, you got to have crushes on people and talk about those crushes. You got to go on dates with those people, and they got to meet your friends and your family, and you got to learn the difference between love and infatuation. And like a 14-year-old is like writing, on their notebook at school, like Mr. and Mrs. So and so, like they
Hearts
get
with
to.
arrows through them.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And you talk to a 14-year-old who has a crush on someone I love this person. We're going to get married. And that's crazy. Like that's not going to happen probably. But they get to have those maturing experiences. So for gay people like me who came out later in life, we didn't get to have those maturing experiences. So when we enter into the romantic world, these feelings of love and infatuation, like we don't know the difference. And because we're allowing ourselves to feel these attractions for the first time. And so, someone in this stage of identity development, they will act like a teenager when it comes to same sex love and romance. And so, once someone acknowledges, like, "Hey, I'm gay. I'm attracted to men," they might meet another gay person and then suddenly be infatuated with them. And I'm sure for the spouse that's incredibly jarring, and that's also really really common for people in this stage to like really cling to like someone they find attractive, they find attractive because they didn't get to allow themselves to have those feelings before.
That
This,
makes Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go
no,
ahead.
please.
Well, I was gonna say that makes a lot of sense, and so that's why straight spouses report, like, "I have 3 kids and not just 2." Like, all of a sudden, they're like,
Yes,
"Okay, we have 3 teenagers in the house." And whereas, like, we have 2
yes.
kids, but 3 teenagers, so that would make a lot of sense. They see a lot of behaviors that are anathema and don't make sense, and so I
Mhm.
think and may, rub, on the nerves a little bit, and so I think this gives some context around what's actually happening. And yeah, we've heard the term gay adolescence before. So now we understand that that's a part of the development piece here.
Definitely. And I've seen this so many times where like there will be like a real professional adult, like they're a mature person in every aspect of their life, but when it comes to their orientation and gay related things, they are so immature about it. Like they don't know how to
Mm,
talk about it in a healthy way. And but they're like in their real life, they're like a lawyer or a doctor. They know how to
mm.
live life. And so, what you said, like a spouse feeling like they have 3 teenagers and not just 2, that's really common in this stage.
Would you say that coming out happens obviously it's not happening at the identity comparison or identity tolerance phase, but at the identity acceptance phase where they're now trying it's like the coming out process comes if they're going to come out of their own volition rather than some kind of discovery or something like that by a spouse. Coming out of their own volition might happen, would you say, between those two stages?
Yeah, I would say like if they're really struggling with, I need love, I need support. Stage 2 is kind of where that would happen. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm trying to figure this out. Help me figure this out. That's more of a stage 3 coming out, and a stage 4 coming out was like, oh my gosh, my life is falling apart. I got to tell you about this.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Mhm,
and this is the stage 4. This identity acceptance stage is the stage where people start to see like, okay, my life isn't going to be normal. Like
mm,
the life I thought I was going to have probably isn't going to work out the way I thought. And because of that, people start to have increasing anger towards, what we might call homophobic elements of society.
mm,
And so they start to get really mad at a lot of things. And so in the first three stages are mostly internal. And there are all these feelings of like, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I need to change. And then in stage 4, those same feelings exist, but instead of being pointed inward, they're now pointing outward. So instead of I'm bad, I'm wrong, I need to change, it's you're bad, our church is wrong, the society needs to change. And so they're the same feelings, but instead of being pointed inward, they're pointed outward. And as that's happening, much like adolescence, they seek privacy and new friends as they explore their orientation. So this is when a gay male spouse will start to hang out with other like gay male spouses, and they will form a lot of new friendships. And I've talked to some partners where they're like, my husband, like I barely saw my husband, I felt like a single mom, and we made a goal to spend 15 minutes together every day, just the 2 of us, and we're still working on that to make that happen.
mhm,
And spouses will say like, my husband is just always out with his new gay friends and I barely see him.
mhm,
And so this is really common. This is also a time where someone will experience what we will call grief over the quote unquote lost years. Like,
mhm,
oh, I was hiding for so long, I hated myself for so long, and I didn't have to, and I lost so much time. And
Yeah.
so people will be feeling anger, grief, and seeking new friendships and relationships.
That's an interesting parallel because that'll happen for the straight spouse after the fact. So once it's clear that if the relationship is not going to last, then the straight spouse will be going, okay, those were my youth years. Those are years that I could have been with someone who was attracted to me or returned my sexual desire, etc. And so those are years that feel lost to the straight spouse too. But it just comes at
Yes.
a later stage. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And the straight spouses, like I said before, go through these same processes. And
Hmm.
they also have to go through a coming out process. They also have to go through a labeling process. Like, am I in a straight marriage? Or are we going to talk about a gay marriage or a straight marriage or a mixed orientation marriage? Are we even going to use a label? And who do I tell? Okay, this isn't real, this isn't happening. Like, okay, we can make this work, then oh no, our marriage isn't going to be normal. So straight
Yeah.
spouses go through, like we've been saying, the exact same processes.
Yeah. Sometimes, straight spouses, like, they will be in the closet with their spouse for a certain amount of time, like maybe 2 years where they're trying to figure out if they can keep their family together and so just won't tell anyone. And so they're in the closet together or, versus other experiences where it's like as soon as there's enough information to understand that we're fundamentally incompatible in an orientation perspective, it's like gone out. So,
Mhm.
yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that was the identity acceptance phase. Am I on track here?
Yep.
Okay,
Mhm. Yep.
so all right, what's next after that?
Stage 5 is called identity pride. And this is when there's this big pendulum swing. So at the beginning, we talked about I'm not gay, this isn't real, this isn't happening. And now this pendulum has swung. And this is when in this stage someone says, I am gay and that is all that matters about me. Like this is the most important thing in my life.
Mm,
And so this is when someone will over identify with being gay, with the LGBTQ subculture, and they'll devour books, information about the culture. So people will be reading books, they'll be reading blogs, they'll be listening to podcasts, they'll watch movies, they'll read like YA LGBTQ fiction.
mhm.
This is when like gay is the thing that matters the most in their life. And this is when people will engage in what others on the outside might describe as dangerous, oppositional, or defiant behaviors. This is when someone might go to a pride festival and then post about it, or this is when they might want to come out like in an online post, for example. And that can happen in earlier stages, but this is the stage where everyone needs to know what I have been experiencing. I'm going to talk about it all the time. So for some people, this looks like waving a rainbow flag in a pride parade. My identity pride stage was a little different. I'm a very I'm a very active person in a conservative religion, and when I came out at the age of 30, I'm 40 now, but I came out publicly at the age of 30, and then I started blogging about my experiences being a gay Latter-day Saint like 3 or 4 times a month. Like I was writing an article like every week, and then I started a support group for gay Latter-day Saints in the town I was living in. And then we started these things that we called ally nights, where we invite a bunch of people over to my house, and then 2 of us from the group would share our stories about being gay Latter-day Saints, and then we'd let people ask us questions. I did like one of these a week. Like gay was my life. It was the thing that mattered most to me. And that is a very normal part of this process of like healing from one's shame, because you just like hid this for so long. And now I just need to like get this out. I need to be seen. I need to talk about it. Like all these things I've been holding in, I need to just get that out. Now, while being gay isn't a phase, the pride stage is a phase. The identity pride stage is a phase, and it won't last, but it can be especially jarring for family and friends, and especially jarring for people who didn't know that the other 4 stages were happening. Like they missed all the
Mm,
internal stuff,
mhm.
and then suddenly the person's like, "I'm gay, and I want to tell you about it." And this is especially hard for bisexual people, because when they come out, people say, "Well, why are you telling me?" Like, I don't need, like, if you're married to a straight spouse, what does it matter to me if you're bi? Like, just keep it to yourself. And so there can be a lot of rejection at this stage, because the person is just like so overtly gay, and people can feel like that they're being like in your face about it. Like I don't need to hear about this, but the LGBTQ person like needs to get it out. Like that's how they're processing and healing from the shame and isolation they felt before.
Okay, this is great because I think there's a couple points in here that I want to highlight. First of all, that you said it was temporary. And
Mhm.
I know a lot of straight spouses will be glad to hear that. One of the, pain points for straight spouses is that first post, coming out post on Facebook or whatever social media, and they come to a support group and they'll say, "Yeah, she posted and came out on social media and went to Pride, and there's pictures with our kids." With him, his new boyfriend, her new girlfriend at Pride, and I'm over here sobbing because I'm not sure how, it just seems like she dropped our family like that, like hotcakes, and then went
Mhm.
and created a new family with our kids. Like it just gets really, really loud. And June, not going to lie, is a difficult month. Even, and we do have a lot of parents who have LGBT kids, like, so a
Mhm.
lot of people are straight spouses, and then they also have gay kids. So they're supportive on the one hand, and then they're grieving on the other hand as well. And then, they're like, okay, I don't want to see a rainbow for a month. So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that makes sense that that this is a fate. Like it makes sense that all of a sudden it's like they're making up for lost time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And the best way to, and like this is going to happen. I mean, I see this happen so many times. I mean, everyone's story is different, but this is a very common thing to go through.
Hmm.
And so the best way to help someone through their identity pride stage is just like be with them in it. So if they're going to read something, say, "Hey, can we read it together and then talk about it?"
Hmm.
Like if there's a
Hmm.
movie you want to watch, like let's go watch that movie and talk about it. If you can be with them in this part of their journey, as painful as that might be, but if that's something that you are able to do, then that will help them heal from it. Because the reason people are being so loud and so open about it is because they want to be seen, they want to be heard.
Hmm.
So if you can help them feel seen and help them be heard, they'll go through the pride stage a bit faster. And I do want to say like this is a healthy stage. Like this is not a bad thing. It's a very common way to help people heal from their shame. Like now I'm still a gay person. I still write about being gay and talk about my experiences, but I just don't feel the need to do that. But now it's just like part of my life.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So I think we have one more stage to talk about.
Yep,
Yeah,
the
okay, what
last
and what
stage.
is that?
This is called the identity synthesis stage, and so this is when the concept of us versus them breaks down. So in the pride stage, it'll be like the LGBTQ folks against the
The
the straight
straights.
people who have oppressed us,
Right.
and that starts to break down, and people will reintegrate into larger society. So in the pride stage, someone's network, their close friends will be mostly LGBTQ. So from I don't know any LGBTQ people to that's my core right now.
Mhm.
And so they'll reintegrate into larger society. And then like the heterosexism and the homophobia that used to make them so upset, like no longer dominate their lives. And then their orientation just becomes part of their identity.
Right.
And so there's a great episode of Queer Eye where they talk about this. I don't know if you guys have seen Queer Eye. It's this Netflix show
I have,
where
yeah, yeah,
okay, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Five queer guys show up in someone's house, and then for a week they like fix everything up, like they
and help
teach them how to
them.
cook. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's great. And in one episode, their guest was a trans man,
Mm,
and so that they go into the trans man's house, and there's like rainbow flags and trans flags everywhere. Like it's all rainbows and trans
mhm,
flags. Like that's the whole aesthetic. And Bobby, who was the home designer,
mhm.
he was like, okay, so being trans is an important part of your identity and it's a pillar in your house, but it's one of many pillars.
Mm,
So we are
mhm.
going to honor that pillar and also honor the many other parts of who you are.
Right.
And so this is that identity synthesis stage where, being gay, being LGBTQ becomes a core part of one's identity, but
Mhm.
not the only defining factor, or as in previous stages, something that you were trying to hide or get rid of.
Got it.
And so this is where we want people to get to, where I am, like my orientation is part of who I am, but it's not all of who I am, and it's also not none of who I am.
Right. I think that's such a good point, and it translates for a lot of our spouses, not all, but a lot of our spouses. Like they'll notice, 10 years down the road or whatever. Like I can co-parent with him now. I can co-parent
Hmm.
with her now. Like there's a
Yes.
there's a calming down, if you will, and and just a resumption of some kind of baseline normalcy, if you will,
Hmm.
in the life. And I think a lot of our listeners would recognize that phase. Um, I want to go back to two sort of pieces. So one of the and I know where, these labels are really loose for these stages.
Mhm.
But one of the things that we experience a lot as straight spouses is denial. And
Mhm.
denial is not necessarily one of the names of one of these stages that we've talked about, but it seems like it would come in the sort of identity confusion and identity comparison phase. And as you were
Definitely.
mentioning before, like, this is not the moment to confront a spouse. And yet, straight spouses don't necessarily know that. I mean, I certainly fell into that trap where it was like,
Mhm.
okay, uh, there was the conversation before we were dating, but then there was a conversation later on in our marriage, and it was a fraught one because it was just after intimacy, and
Mhm.
it was like, okay, something's really off here, and we're talking about this now. I got to put it on the table. I got to put it in the room. I got to speak it in the space, and I need an answer. And obviously, that conversation did not go well. So, what do you have? And the denial can feel like, for straight spouses, it can feel like gaslighting. It can feel like psychological manipulation. It can feel like intentional deception, and it can be received in those ways. So, what do you say, both to a straight spouse experiencing that and to the LGBT spouse doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I'd want to say is, I've given some like the advice I always give is it's best not to confront the person. It's best to let them be on their own timeline and let them come out when they're ready to come out. But at the same time, like you got to trust your gut. If you know it's time and you want to confront the person or address something that you think has been happening, trust your gut. But for the most part, it usually goes better when the LGBTQ person chooses to come out on in their timing. But that might be something that they're never ready to do. And then as far as the manipulation, the gaslighting, there are probably some spouses that enter into a relationship doing just that. I think that's probably far in the minority. Most gay people who enter into a mixed orientation marriage, they're doing it in good faith. They're doing it because they believe it's the right thing to do. They love the person they're marrying. They want to have a traditional family. Their religious traditions are teaching them to do that, and so they're doing it in good faith. And so I know it makes sense to feel like, oh, they're lying to me, they betrayed me, they're gaslighting me, they're manipulating me. I think most people are just entering into this, with the best of intentions. Maybe not with their eyes as open as they should be, but with the best of intentions. And when I was pursuing marriage to a woman, I was doing it because I felt like that's what God wanted me to do. And
Mm,
there was really, to me, no other way to live life.
mhm.
Like I couldn't be a single person. I couldn't be in a gay relationship. Like that just, there was no other way to live life than to be in a traditional marriage. Like that had to be. So I talk to a lot of gay men who are married and they'll say, should I tell my spouse? And this is what I always tell them. I say, at some point, they're going to know. Like they're going to know. This isn't a secret that you're going to take to your grave. Like they're going to know.
Yeah,
And and so the question isn't should I or shouldn't I, but when do I tell them?
yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I think, for me, a couple of things that get lost in that calculus, just and personally, one of the things that was difficult for me to wrap my head around with my own situation, and I think a lot of our listeners will relate, is at what point did he ask, "Is this fair to her?"
Mhm.
And at what point did he ask, she should have agency to make her own decision about whether she wants to be in a mixed orientation or marriage or not, and she has a right to make that decision. And then
Yeah.
if that's, one of my favorite people, who also happens to be a straight spouse, but she's an author of climate fiction, which is really interesting.
Uh-huh.
She said, don't lie to me. Tell me everything I need to know to live my most authentic life.
Mhm.
And so, this is not just in closeted marriages, this is in any marriage where there's infidelity happening or things like that. So it's it's that is this fair to this person, especially if there are aspects of the relationship that are missing and the straight spouse would like to have, or is kind of banging their head against the wall to try to figure out how to solve that sort of
Mhm.
thing. And so, what do you say to, I know you were talking about telling them it's not if, it's when, but do you? point out that there's a point of empathy for the straight spouse that can be considered.
Yes, definitely.
Mhm,
Because when you are in a marriage, you are in a partnership,
mhm.
and everything in your life affects that person's life as well.
Right.
And this is especially important if there has been infidelity that hasn't been disclosed,
Yeah.
because gay men in particular who are in this gay adolescence phase, they likely haven't been taught what safe sex looks like in
Mhm.
a gay relationship, and so if they're engaging in sexual behavior and they haven't told their spouse, they are putting their spouse like
Yes.
at risk and
Yeah.
physical harm,
Yeah.
and that is not okay.
Yeah.
And so at the very least, you have to keep your spouse physically safe, but also emotionally safe. And that is definitely something that we talk about. And so, with these clients I have who come out to me but haven't come out to their spouse yet, we have this, it's not if but when.
Mhm.
And I tell them, the time is probably now, and
Mhm.
let's talk about your fears of doing that, and a way to do it in a way that would be less scary. And also, would you like your spouse to come in and the three of us could have the conversation? No one has ever taken me up on that offer.
Mhm.
Um, but which I think is probably best. But that's just my offer, so they can feel like they're not alone in it. But yeah, I think that most of the gay spouses I've talked to have already felt terrible
Mhm.
about lying to their partner.
Mhm.
Like most of them already feel so bad, but they just feel so stuck. Like, well, what do I do?
Mhm.
And I talked to a gay person once who said this. He said, I need to tell my wife, but this will completely destroy my world.
Mhm.
And so there's this fear of, I love my kids, I love so much my life. And if I tell them, is my world going to end? And so there's a lot of fear that can come out. And then when people are terrified, when they feel pushed into a corner, they sometimes act out in ways that are unhealthy in a relationship
Yeah.
and can do things that are manipulative and unkind.
Right. And some of that anger can then be put onto the spouse, the straight spouse. Like it's a deflection or a misdirection rather of where some of that anger can go. When you said you offer to your clients to come into your office and they don't take you up on, I'm a little bit sorry about that, because what we experience in the coming out process in the where there is disclosure at some point is there are not a lot. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of resources for people on how to come out to a spouse in a way that mitigates damage. And what we find is that the coming out process can either help if it's done well, and I'm putting air
Mhm.
quotes around well because what's well, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if it's done well enough, it can pave the path for future amicability in the relationship. And if it's done poorly, in a way that is, uh, one of those, it's a fast thing. I blurted out at our anniversary or on her birthday or on our family vacation or something like that. Like a lot of times there's this moment where the LGBT spouse is going, I can't go one more family vacation like this. And so on family vacation, it's like, here it is. Um,
Yeah.
like I was on, for example, I was on the Human Rights Campaign's website. I've said this on this podcast before. There's guides to coming out in all different contexts, like coming out to your doctor, coming out to your parents, coming out to your grandparents, coming out at work. There's no guide on the Human Rights Campaign's website coming out to your spouse. And we've written one, we have one on our website. But I mean, arguably, one of the most important comings out that you would be doing would be to your spouse. And it just seems like a gross oversight not to have something like that for LGBT spouses coming out, because there's so many aspects to disclosure that, again, when done well and planned well and thoughtfully, uh, it it can pave a way for a much smoother transition and healing for the straight spouse, which is really important. So a lot of times the coming out process or the manner of coming out can add to the injury. So how do you advise your clients to come out when if they don't come in your office to do it together? How do you advise them to do that?
Yeah, the thing I tell them is, talk about your experience.
Mhm.
Share what your childhood was like how you came to understand this. Talk about why you chose your spouse. Talk about the good things in your relationship, and just help them see you. If someone's coming out to a spouse, if they've been married for a year, 2 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, there's also a reason why it's happening right then. And so after letting them, see a bit of your past, and also see, why you chose this life, what you love about your life, then explain to them, like, why now? Like, what
Mhm.
is it about this moment, that's leading to you telling them? And for a lot of people, that gives them the context. And then the thing I always tell them is, this is the first conversation,
Mhm.
and understand there's going to be a second and a third and a fourth, and a
Mhm.
50th conversation as
Right.
well. And so let the conversation be about, this is what I've been experiencing, and this is why I love you.
Yeah.
And then in the next conversation, whatever you feel needs to happen, but the first conversation needs to be about, this is my experience, this is what I've been hiding, I'm letting you in because I love you, and this is why I have chosen to be with you.
And also, I will answer any of your questions that I can, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of times straight spouses feel like their questions don't get answered, or they get left hanging with certain things. They're going, "Well, did you love me on our wedding day?" Right? Or "Did you
Hmm.
love me on our honeymoon?" Like your history has to be rewritten with this new information. And you
Hmm.
have to integrate, like, well, was the whole life we were living a lie, or was it a fraud, or something like that? And in order to process that or heal from that, they need to be able to ask a lot of questions. And
Hmm.
so it's beneficial, I think, when the LGBT person is willing to answer honestly, like, okay, yes, this is what I this is. I, I always say nothing feels as good as the truth, even if it's
Hmm.
a hard truth. I can accept and move on from the truth. Like, just tell me the truth, and
Yeah.
I can integrate. Even if it's bad, even if it's hurtful in this moment, I will know it, because when something is not quite true.
Yeah.
So and you can heal better. And the other piece too that I think is so critical is that this impacts a straight spouse's ability to trust themselves going forward in the future. Like, they
Hmm.
often have experiences of, can I trust myself to discern that somebody's telling me the truth of who they are? And if not, then how do I learn how to trust myself when um, I feel like somebody might not be telling me the whole truth? I get those vibes, right? Like, something's a little bit off here. I feel like somebody. So when the LGBT spouse obliges that and says, "I will answer every question you have as truthfully and honestly as I can," it helps rebuild the straight spouse's trust in themselves and others.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
That is so. Yeah.
I'm sure that the LGBT spouse is learning how to trust themselves too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you just said, like, this lack of trusting in oneself, this feeling of betrayal, and what has my life even been, is so normal and so common. And what you said about, I can handle the truth. Brene Brown says, clear is kind,
Mm,
unclear is unkind. And
right.
so if we can just tell the truth,
Mhm.
that's the way to move forward for sure.
Beautiful. Well, this has been such an illuminating and, I think, productive conversation. And before we close, I just want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything else that you feel straight spouses, our audience, need to know, that might help them heal, or help give them context, or help them understand when they're, in the midst of this experience.
Yeah. I would say that the pain you're feeling is real. That all the feelings you have are valid, and I'm sorry that this has been such a hard experience. And I just want to say that, having talked to many gay spouses and mixed orientation marriages, that pain was unintentional, that betrayal was unintentional, and that doesn't fix the pain or ease the pain, but my guess is, in 99.999% of the cases, everyone was going into these marriages in good faith and just wanting to do what was right. And so I'm sorry for the pain. It's real.
Mm. Well, thank you for that. I hope our audience hears that. And for the audience, where can they find you on the internet, et cetera, if they want to, or your podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, my podcast, All Out in the Open, is on all major podcast platforms. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, at Ben Schilaty. Spelling Schilaty is the hardest part.
Hmm.
But people can reach out to me there. And I've also got a website, benschilaty.com, that people can reach out to me at. And I've got a book called, that you said already, people can get my book. It's very Larry Saint focused, but it's pretty good.
Great. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes. And thank you again for coming on. I think this is a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning into the show today, and I want you to be on lookout for new episodes as they drop, which is usually the first of the month if we can manage it. This is a friendly reminder that the views of the host, yours truly, are not necessarily the views of Our Path or its board of directors. I want to thank our engineer and editor, Adam, right here at Play Audio Agency in Cincinnati, Ohio. And until next time, this is Kristen reminding you, keep using your voice.